The medical bay's emergency lights cast long shadows across Dr. Rebecca Stone's face as she worked frantically over the small body on the examination table. A human child, no more than 8 years old, lay unconscious with strange neural implants embedded behind both ears. The metallic devices pulsed with an alien blue light that made Rebecca's skin crawl. "How many more are there?" she asked without looking up from her scanner readings. Commander Alex Torres stood in the doorway, his uniform still smoking from the firefight they'd just finished. 47 children so far, all between ages 5 and 15. The bastards. Had them stored like specimens in some kind of biostorage facility. Rebecca's hands trembled as she examined the neural pathways shown on her medical display. Whatever the collective had done to these children went far beyond simple imprisonment. The implants were actively interfacing with their developing brains, recording and analyzing every neural response. "Doctor, you need to see this." Torres handed her a datapad containing translated files they'd recovered from the facility. "These aren't just prison records, they're research logs." Rebecca's blood ran cold as she read the clinical descriptions of the experiments, pain threshold testing, fear response mapping, social isolation studies. The collective had been systematically torturing these children while measuring their psychological and physiological responses. Subject 23, human female, approximately 7 Earth years, responds to maternal separation, with elevated stress hormones lasting 72 hours. Recommending extended isolation to test breaking point. Subject 31, human male, approximately 12 Earth years, shows interesting aggression patterns when witnessing harm to younger subjects, useful for studying protective instinct degradation. "They were studying us," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment's humming. "Using our own children as test subjects to learn how to break us," Torres nodded grimly. The facility had detailed psychological profiles on every major human colony. "They've been planning something big, and they needed to understand our weaknesses first." The child on the table stirred slightly, and Rebecca quickly administered a mild sedative. She couldn't bear the thought of him waking up in confusion and terror again. The neural damage alone would take months to repair, assuming it could be repaired at all. "There's more," Torres continued, his voice heavy with barely contained rage. "We found video logs. The researchers were recording everything. Every scream, every breakdown, every moment of despair. They cataloged it all like it was valuable scientific data." Rebecca felt bile rise in her throat. She'd seen the aftermath of many conflicts during her 15 years as a fleet medical officer, but nothing had prepared her for this level of calculated cruelty. The collective hadn't just captured these children, they'd turned them into living laboratories. "What about the parents?" she asked, though she already feared the answer. "Most were killed during the initial raids," Torres replied quietly. "But some were kept alive. They had them in separate facilities where they could observe parental distress responses when shown footage of their children's suffering." The scanner beeped softly, and Rebecca looked down at the readouts with growing horror. The neural implants weren't just recording the children's responses. They were actively modifying their brain chemistry, enhancing fear responses while suppressing hope and resilience. "These devices," she said, pointing to the implants, "they're not just monitoring equipment, they're behavioral modification tools. The collective was trying to break these children's spirits permanently." Torres stepped closer to examine the scanner readings. "Can you remove them safely?" "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "The integration with their neural tissue is incredibly sophisticated. One wrong move and we could cause permanent brain damage. But leaving them in place means the children will continue to experience artificially heightened trauma responses." She pulled up another set of files on her datapad, showing detailed anatomical studies the collective had conducted. They'd mapped every aspect of human neural development, focusing specifically on the formation of emotional responses and social bonding. "Look at this." She showed Torres a particularly disturbing section. They were trying to identify the exact neural pathways responsible for human empathy and cooperation. They wanted to know how to turn us against each other. The implications were staggering. If the collective had succeeded in their research, they would have possessed the knowledge to psychologically manipulate entire human populations. They could have turned humanity's greatest strengths into weaknesses. "There's something else you need to know," Torres said, his expression growing even more grim. "The children we found, they're not the only ones. We've detected similar facilities in 17 different star systems, all within human space." Rebecca felt the room spinning around her. 47. Children in this facility alone multiplied across 17 systems. The scale of the atrocity was beyond comprehension. "How long?" she asked. "How long have they been doing this?" "Based on the facility's construction and the children's medical records, at least 18 months, Torres replied. "Maybe longer. The oldest subjects show signs of extensive psychological conditioning. They've been trained to suppress emotional responses to pain and fear." The child on the table whimpered softly in his sedated sleep, and Rebecca gently placed her hand on his forehead. His skin was pale and cold, and she could feel the subtle vibrations from the neural implants. "What's our next move?" she asked. Torres straightened his shoulders. "Admiral Chen has ordered the immediate mobilization of every available fleet. We're going to hit all 17 facilities simultaneously. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Rebecca nodded and began preparing her equipment for a detailed neural mapping procedure. If they were going to save these children, she needed to understand precisely how the collective's technology worked, Commander, she said as Torres turned to leave. "When we find the creatures responsible for this, when we track down every researcher, every administrator, every being who knew about these facilities and did nothing to stop it. Yes, I want to be there when we show them what human response patterns look like when you push us past our breaking point." Torres smiled grimly. "Doctor, I guarantee you'll get that chance." As he left the medical bay, Rebecca turned back to her, patient, and began the delicate process of mapping the neural implants. Each reading she took revealed new layers of the collective's systematic cruelty, but also gave her hope that the damage might be reversible. The children would recover, she promised herself, and the beings responsible for their suffering would learn that there were some lines that should never be crossed. The underground chamber stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction, filled with thousands of cylindrical containers that hummed with alien technology. Admiral Sarah Chen walked slowly between the rows, her jaw clenched so tightly, her teeth ached as she observed what the collective had called their Human Development Archive. Each container held a child suspended in clear fluid, their small bodies connected to dozens of monitoring cables and feeding tubes. The youngest appeared to be barely 5 years old, while the oldest looked to be in their mid-teens. All of them floated in artificial sleep, completely unaware of their surroundings. "How many facilities like this have we found so far?" Chen asked her aide, Lieutenant Commander James Park, who was struggling to maintain his composure as they walked through the nightmare landscape. "This is the largest one, Admiral. Approximately 3,000 subjects, but we've confirmed similar installations on 12 other worlds. Conservative estimates put the total number of imprisoned children at over 15,000. Chen stopped walking and stared at a container holding a girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The child's head was covered with neural monitoring equipment, and according to the alien text on the container, she had been subjected to something called advanced terror response conditioning. What does that mean? Chen pointed to the text. Park consulted his translation device, and his face went pale. It means they've been systematically exposing her to increasingly intense fear stimuli to map how human children's minds break down under psychological pressure. The log shows she's been here for 14 months. Chen felt something cold and violent settling in her chest. She'd commanded fleets through 3 major conflicts and had seen the worst that warfare could offer. But this systematic torture of children was beyond anything she had encountered, Admiral Park continued, reading from his scanner. The research data we're recovering suggests this wasn't random experimentation. The collective has been using these children to develop psychological warfare techniques specifically designed to target human populations. They moved to a central control station where holographic displays showed detailed analyses of human neural patterns, emotional responses, and behavioral modifications. The collective had been treating human children like laboratory rats, studying every aspect of their psychological development. Look at this. Park highlighted a section of research data. They've been testing what they call species loyalty degradation. They've been trying to determine how to make human children turn against their own families and communities. Chen studied the horrific data with growing fury. The research showed systematic attempts to break down the children's natural bonding instincts, to make them distrust other humans and seek approval only from their collective captors. They were trying to create human collaborators, she realized. Children who would grow up believing the collective was their true family. It gets worse. Admiral. Park activated another display showing video footage from the facility's security cameras. They've been broadcasting some of the experiments to other collective worlds. They were using the children's suffering as entertainment. The screens showed collective researchers gathering around viewing stations, watching as human children were subjected to various forms of psychological torture while they took detailed notes and measurements. Some of the alien creatures appeared to be enjoying the displays. Chen had to grip the control console to keep herself upright as waves of pure rage washed over her. These beings hadn't just been conducting research, they had been savoring every moment of human suffering they could create. Admiral Park's voice was carefully controlled. There's something else. We found evidence that they were planning to expand the program. They had architectural plans for facilities capable of holding over 50,000 human subjects. The implications were staggering. The collective hadn't been content with studying a few thousand children. They had been preparing for industrial-scale psychological experimentation on human populations. What about the adult facilities? Chen asked. We've located 6 installations containing approximately 8,000 adult prisoners, Park replied. The research there focused on different aspects. They were studying human social structures, leadership patterns, and resistance movements. Chen walked over to examine another section of the facility, where the containers were arranged differently. These children were connected to even more complex monitoring equipment, and their containers were linked together in networked clusters. What's different about these subjects? She asked. Park checked his readings and went even paler. They were testing collective psychological manipulation. They would induce trauma in one child while measuring how the emotional distress spread to the others. They were trying to map human empathy networks. They were weaponizing our compassion. Chen said quietly. Yes, Admiral. The data suggests they believed they could trigger cascading psychological collapses in human populations by targeting specific individuals within social networks. Chen stared at the networked containers, imagining the terror these children had experienced as they felt each other's pain through the collective's twisted experiments. The aliens had taken humanity's greatest strength, their ability to care for one another, and turned it into a weapon against them. Status. Report on the rescue operations, she ordered. All facilities have been secured. Admiral, medical teams are working around the clock to safely remove the monitoring equipment and begin treatment. Initial assessments suggest that most of the children can be saved, though many will require extensive psychological rehabilitation. Chen nodded, then activated her communication system to contact the fleet commanders throughout human space. This is Admiral Chen to all fleet commanders. Priority Alpha authorization. I am declaring General Order 7, Total Species Elimination, Protocol. There was a moment of shocked silence before the responses began coming in. General Order 7 hadn't been invoked since the early colonial wars, and it meant exactly what it sounded like. The complete and systematic elimination of an entire species, Admiral Park said quietly. The Galactic Council will condemn us. There will be sanctions, possibly military intervention from other species. Chen looked around at the thousands of containers holding tortured human children, then at the research data showing the collective's plans for even larger facilities. Let them condemn us, Commander. Let every species in the galaxy know that this is what happens when you torture our children. She opened another communication channel, this time broadcasting to every human world, colony, and station. Citizens of human space. Today, we discovered the true nature of the collective's research programs. They have been systematically torturing our children to study human psychology. 15,000 of our sons and daughters have been used as experimental subjects. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, every human military installation was reporting volunteers flooding their recruitment centers. The collective had awakened something in humanity that they were completely unprepared to face, Commander Park. Chen said, as she watched the rescue, teams carefully extracting children from their containers. Send a message to the collective leadership. Tell them they have 72 hours to surrender every remaining human prisoner and submit to complete species termination. After that, we start glassing their worlds. The collective's high command center buzzed with panicked activity as reports flooded in from across their territory. Within the past 6 hours, human fleets had appeared in over 30 star systems simultaneously, each one demanding immediate and unconditional surrender. Prime researcher Velkod stood before the massive holographic display showing the current tactical situation, his forearms trembling with fear as he processed the scope of humanity's response. Every single collective world now had human warships in orbit, and more were arriving every hour. This cannot be correct, he said to his tactical coordinator. Our projections showed human military capacity at less than 200 capital ships. These displays show over 1,000 vessels already deployed, with more launching every hour. The tactical coordinator, a smaller collective creature with enlarged optical organs, manipulated the display to show detailed fleet compositions. The readings are accurate, Prime Researcher. The humans have mobilized their entire military infrastructure, every shipyard, every defense fleet, every reserve unit. They are operating at total war capacity. Velkod's research into human psychology had prepared him for aggressive responses to threats, but this level of mobilization seemed impossible. According to his studies, humans were territorial and protective, but they were also supposed to be rational beings who weighed costs against benefits. What triggered this response, he demanded. Our research facilities were minor operations. Surely, the loss of a few thousand test subjects doesn't justify species-wide military mobilization. The coordinator activated another display showing intercepted human communications. Prime Researcher, our analysis suggests we may have misunderstood human social bonding patterns. The subjects we collected were not just random population samples. They were what humans classify as children, developing members of their species who receive special protection status. Velkod felt his blood cooling with dread. His research had identified human offspring as particularly useful subjects precisely because their developing neural pathways were more responsive to experimentation. He had never considered that this might make them more valuable to adult humans. Show me the human response communications, he ordered, the display filled with intercepted messages between human fleet commanders, and Velkod's translator struggled to process the emotional intensity. Words like vengeance, extermination, and righteous fury appeared repeatedly, along with graphic descriptions of what humans intended to do to collective populations. Prime Researcher, the coordinator said nervously. There's more. The humans have issued a species-wide declaration. They're calling it the Children's Crusade. Every human military unit has been ordered to show no mercy to any collective. Forces. Velkod activated his personal research files, desperately searching for any data that might explain the magnitude of the human response. His studies had focused on individual psychology and small group dynamics. He had never researched species-wide behavioral patterns here. He found a section on human historical warfare. Look at these patterns. When humans perceive threats to their offspring, their aggression levels increase by factors of 10 to 50%. But this response seems to be orders of magnitude beyond those projections. The coordinator pulled up comparative analysis charts showing the current human mobilization against historical precedents. Prime Researcher, this level of response has no precedent in our database. The humans appear to have abandoned all normal strategic considerations. They are deploying forces without regard for defensive positions or supply lines. Velkhad studied the tactical displays with growing horror. Human fleets were emerging from hyperspace in coordinated attacks across dozens of star systems. But they weren't following standard military doctrine. Instead of securing strategic positions or establishing supply corridors, they were moving directly toward population centers. They're not trying to conquer our territory, he realized with dawning terror. They're trying to eliminate us entirely. A new alert flashed across the display as another wave of human ships appeared in the outer colonies. Prime Researcher, we're receiving reports of complete planetary sterilization. The humans aren't taking prisoners or accepting surrenders. They're systematically destroying every collective installation they encounter. Velkhad watched in stunned silence, as tactical reports showed human forces methodically eliminating collective populations across 3 star systems. There was no negotiation, no demand for resources or territory. The humans were simply erasing every trace of collective civilization they could find. Contact the Supreme Council immediately, he ordered. We need to offer complete surrender and reparations. Surely, they can be reasoned with once they understand we're willing to negotiate. The coordinator's expression grew even more fearful. Prime Researcher, we've already tried. The humans are refusing all communication attempts. They're not interested in surrender or negotiation. They've issued only one message. For the children. Velkhad felt his research certainties crumbling around him. Everything he thought he understood about human psychology was proving catastrophically wrong. He had believed that humans, like most intelligent species, could be manipulated through careful application of pressure and reward. Pull up all research data on human children, he commanded. There must be something we missed. Some critical factor in their social structure that we failed to account for. The coordinator activated a massive database containing years of observations and experiments. Prime Researcher, our research focused primarily on individual responses and small group dynamics. We have very limited data on species-wide protective behaviors. As Velkhad reviewed the research files, he began to see the pattern he had missed. Every experiment that had involved threats to human children had produced responses that were far more intense than predicted. The subjects had consistently chosen self-sacrifice over allowing harm to come to young humans. Look at this. He highlighted a series of experiments. When we threatened adult humans with pain, their resistance broke down within predictable time frames. But when we threatened their offspring, even unrelated children, their resistance increased exponentially. The coordinator studied the data with growing understanding. Prime Researcher, it appears that human children aren't just valued individuals within family units. They represent something fundamental to the entire species. Threatening them triggers responses that go beyond rational self-interest. Velkhad stared at the tactical display showing human fleets systematically dismantling collective civilization. We didn't capture test subjects, he said quietly. We declared war on their entire species. Every child we took was perceived as an attack on humanity itself. Another alert flashed as human forces reached the inner colonies. Prime Researcher, they're broadcasting a message on all frequencies. It's a list of names, the names of every human child we captured. The broadcast filled the command center with human voices reading an endless litany of names. Timothy Chen, age 6, Rebecca Torres, age 9, Michael Stone, age 12. Each name was followed by a brief description of what the collective had done to that child. Velkhad listened to the broadcast with mounting dread as he realized what the humans were doing. They weren't just conducting a military campaign. They were conducting a memorial service for their young while simultaneously ensuring that every collective being in the galaxy knew exactly why they were being destroyed. How long until they reached the homeworld? He asked. The coordinator checked the tactical projections. At current speeds, approximately 18 hours. Prime Researcher, what are your orders? Velkhad looked around at the command center filled with panicking collective personnel, then at the displays showing the inexorable advance of human forces. He had spent years studying human psychology. Believing he could predict and control their responses, he had been catastrophically wrong. The humans weren't responding as individuals or even as military units. They were responding as a species whose young had been threatened. And that response was unlike anything in the galaxy's recorded history. Evacuate all non-essential personnel to the Outer Rim territories, he ordered, and prepare a full data transmission to any surviving collective outposts. They need to understand what we learned here. Humans will forgive attacks on themselves, their property, even their worlds. But they will never forgive harm to their children. As the command center erupted into evacuation procedures, Velkad remained at his station, watching the human fleets advance. He had wanted to understand human psychology. Now, in the final hours of his civilization, he understood it perfectly. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Rachel Foster stepped up to the central podium, her dark formal uniform a stark contrast to the colorful diplomatic robes worn by representatives from dozens of alien species. Behind her, massive holographic displays showed the aftermath of humanity's 3-month campaign against the collective. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "you have summoned humanity to answer for what you term our excessive response to collective aggression. You demand explanations for our actions. Very well, let me show you exactly what we responded to." The first display activated, showing footage from the liberated research facilities, rows upon rows of containers holding human children suspended in alien fluid, their small bodies connected to monitoring equipment and neural interfaces. The youngest victims appeared, to be barely old enough to walk. A murmur of discomfort rippled through the assembly as delegates observed the systematic nature of the collective's installations. These weren't makeshift prisons or temporary detention centers. They were purpose-built facilities designed for long-term experimentation on living subjects. 15,347 human children, Foster announced, her voice remaining steady, despite the horrific images surrounding her, aged between 4 and 16 years, taken from their families over a period of 18 months, subjected to what the collective termed advanced psychological research. The Altarian delegate, a tall being with crystalline features, raised one of his 4 hands. "Ambassador Foster, while these images are disturbing, they do not justify the complete elimination of an entire species. Surely some form of justice short of genocide could have been achieved." Foster turned to face the Altarian directly. "Delegate Crisal, let me show you what the collective considered research." The displays shifted to show translated collective research logs, their clinical language describing unthinkable cruelties, pain threshold testing that involved systematic torture, fear response mapping that required inducing terror states in children for weeks at a time, social isolation studies that measured how long it took to break a child's will to live. The collective wasn't studying human psychology to understand us better, Foster continued. They were developing weapons, psychological warfare techniques designed to break human resistance by targeting our protective instincts toward children. The vegan representative, a being resembling a large insect with multifaceted eyes, clicked its mandibles nervously. "Ambassador, even granting the severity of these crimes, your response eliminated over 40 billion collective beings, many of whom had no knowledge of these research programs." Foster's expression hardened. "Delegate Zurich, let me address that claim directly." New displays activated, showing intercepted collective communications from across their territory. These are broadcasts that were transmitted to every collective world during the 18 months of experimentation. Entertainment programs featuring footage of human children being tortured, educational materials teaching, collective young about human weakness exploitation, cultural celebrations marking successful psychological experiments. The chamber erupted in shocked chatter as delegates observed the evidence that the collective's crimes weren't limited to a few researchers. The torture of human children had been integrated into their society as entertainment and education. 40 billion beings, Foster said, her voice cutting through the noise. 40 billion beings who watched our children suffer and found it amusing, who celebrated each breakdown, each moment of terror, as a victory for their civilization. the Andromedan delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell, pulsed with agitated colors. Ambassador Foster, you speak of collective guilt. But surely infants and children among the collective bore no responsibility for these crimes. Yet your forces showed no mercy to any collective population. Foster paused, and for the first time, her carefully controlled demeanor cracked slightly. You want to know about collective children, delegate? Let me show you what we found. The displays shifted to show the most disturbing discovery from the research facilities. Collective young, beings equivalent to human teenagers, who had been trained as research assistants. They had been taught to view human suffering as scientifically valuable and had actively participated in the torture protocols. These are collective children learning to conduct pain experiments on human subjects, Foster explained as the chamber watched in horrified silence. They were being educated in cruelty as part of their normal development. The collective wasn't just committing crimes against humanity. They were raising the next generation to continue and expand those crimes. The Centaurian delegate, an aquatic being speaking through a translation device, bubbled frantically. But Ambassador, surely some form of rehabilitation could have been attempted. Complete species elimination is unprecedented in galactic history. Foster turned to address the entire assembly. Rehabilitation? Delegate, let me share with you the collective's response when we initially discovered the first research facility. A new recording played through the chamber's speakers, the voice of prime researcher Velkad, translated into galactic standard language. These specimens are providing invaluable data on human neural development. We are close to a breakthrough in understanding human emotional matrices. Once we perfect the process, we will be able to predict and manipulate human behavior with unprecedented precision. Even when confronted with our discovery of their crimes, Foster continued. Even when faced with clear evidence of our outrage, the collective's leadership spoke of perfecting their techniques. They showed no remorse, no understanding that they had done anything wrong. They saw our children as laboratory equipment and our anger as merely another data point to be studied. The chamber fell completely silent as the implications sank in. The collective hadn't been conducting rogue research operations. They had been preparing for the systematic psychological conquest of humanity, using techniques developed through the torture of human children. You ask why we showed no mercy, Foster said, her voice now carrying the full weight of humanity's grief and rage. Because mercy would have meant allowing a species that tortured our children for entertainment to continue existing. Because compromise would have meant accepting that some crimes are forgivable. Because negotiation would have validated their belief that human children are acceptable research subjects. The Altarian delegate tried one more time. Ambassador, surely the galactic community could have found a solution that didn't require complete extinction, some form of justice that preserved the possibility of redemption. Foster looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of dozens of species. Delegate Cresol, let me ask you a direct question. If another species captured 4,000 Altarian young and spent 18 months torturing them while broadcasting their suffering as entertainment to billions of viewers, what would your people's response be? The Altarian representative's crystalline features shifted through several color changes before he finally answered. We would demand justice, but what would your response be? Foster repeated, cutting him off. After a long pause, the Altarian delegate spoke quietly. We would seek complete annihilation of the perpetrators. Foster nodded. Then you understand our response. The only difference is that humanity had the capability to ensure justice was actually delivered. She turned back to address the full assembly. The collective studied us for 18 months. They learned about human psychology, human protective instincts, human capacity for both compassion and violence. They thought they understood us well enough to predict and control our responses. The displays around the chamber shifted one final time, showing images of human rescue teams gently carrying traumatized children from the research facilities. They were right about one thing. They did learn what drives humanity. They learned that we will cross any distance, pay any price, and face any enemy to protect our young. They just failed to understand that this knowledge would be the last thing they ever learned. 5 years had passed since the last collective world burned under human plasma bombardment, and the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new equilibrium. Dr. Rebecca Stone walked through the gardens of the New Earth Memorial Colony, watching as children who had once floated in alien torture chambers now played freely under an alien sun. "Dr. Stone?" A young voice called out. She turned to see Timothy, now 13 years old, running toward her with the boundless energy that had taken years to return. His neural implant scars were barely visible now, hidden beneath hair that had grown back thick and healthy. "How are you feeling today, Timothy?" she asked, kneeling down to his eye level. "The nightmares are getting better," he replied with the matter-of-fact tone that the rescued children had all developed when discussing their trauma. "Dr. Martinez says my brain patterns are almost back to normal ranges." Rebecca smiled, though the term normal had taken on new meaning for all of them. The children had recovered remarkably well, their young minds proving more resilient than anyone had dared hope. But they would always carry the memory of what had been done to them. "Are you still planning to join the academy when you turn 16? She asked. Timothy's eyes lit up with determination. "Yes, ma'am. I want to be a fleet engineer. I want to help build ships that can protect other kids from what happened to us." Rebecca felt the familiar mixture of pride and sadness that came with watching these children plan their futures. They had survived unimaginable trauma, but instead of being broken by it, they had chosen to dedicate their lives to ensuring it never happened again. "The council voted yesterday," she told him. "The collective memorial protocols were approved. Every species in the galaxy will be required to teach about what happened to you and the other children." Timothy nodded solemnly. "Good. Everyone should know, so it never happens again." As Rebecca watched him run back to join his friends, she reflected on the changes that had swept through galactic civilization since humanity's response to the collective. The complete elimination of an entire species had shocked the galaxy into a new understanding of interspecies relations. The Galactic Council had initially condemned humanity's actions, but as more details emerged about the scope and nature of the collective's crimes, even the most pacifist species had begun to understand. Several worlds had quietly approached human diplomats to express their support, admitting that they would have responded similarly if their own young had been targeted. "Dr. Stone." Another voice called from behind her. She turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, now retired from active service but still carrying herself with military bearing. The Admiral had aged visibly in the years since the war, the weight of ordering the extinction of an entire species leaving permanent marks on her features. "Admiral," Rebecca said respectfully. "How are the integration protocols proceeding?" "Better than expected," Chen replied, watching the children play. 17 species have requested human military advisors to help develop child protection protocols. The Andromedan Union wants us to help design new evacuation procedures, specifically for protecting young beings during conflicts. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as human and alien children played together in the memorial gardens. The colony had become a symbol of recovery and resilience, home not just to the rescued human children, but to young beings from across the galaxy whose parents wanted them to understand the importance of protecting the innocent. "Any news from the Outer Rim?" Rebecca asked. Chen's expression darkened slightly. 3 more species have requested human intervention in territorial disputes. They seem to believe that having humans as allies will deter aggression from potential enemies. Rebecca understood. The implications: humanity had gained a reputation as protectors, but also as beings capable of unlimited violence when sufficiently provoked. The galaxy now walked carefully around human interests, not out of respect, but out of fear. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked quietly. Chen was silent for a long moment before answering. "Rebecca, in the years since the war ended, we've received intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The collective wasn't the only species conducting research on captured aliens. They were just the most systematic about it." Rebecca felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. "How many others?" "At least 6 species were operating similar programs on a smaller scale," Chen replied. All of them shut down their operations immediately after news of our response spread. Some destroyed evidence so thoroughly that we'll never know the full scope of what they were doing. The implications were staggering. By making an example of the collective, humanity had potentially prevented similar atrocities across dozens of worlds. The complete elimination of one species had saved countless others from the same fate. The children know, don't they? Chen asked, watching Timothy and his friends design what appeared to be a spaceship in the sandbox. Some of them, Rebecca confirmed. They understand that their suffering wasn't just about them, that it was part of something larger. Many of them have chosen careers specifically focused on prevention and protection. Chen nodded approvingly. Good. They're turning their trauma into purpose. That's the most human response I can imagine. A chime sounded across the colony grounds, signaling the beginning of the daily memorial service. Children and adults gathered in the central plaza, where a simple monument listed the names of every human child who had been rescued from collective facilities. As they recited the names together, Rebecca noticed delegates from several alien species standing respectfully at the edge of the gathering. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about the memorial services, and representatives from dozens of worlds now made pilgrimages to witness humanity's remembrance of its lost innocence. Timothy Chen, age 6, Rebecca Torres, age 9, Michael Stone, age 12. The voices continued, each name followed by a moment of silence that seemed to echo across the entire colony. After the service concluded, Chen and Rebecca walked toward the memorial wall where the children's artwork was displayed. Drawings and paintings that showed their dreams for the future, their hopes for a galaxy where no child would suffer as they had, Admiral. Rebecca said as they paused before a particularly striking painting showing human and alien children playing together under multiple suns. Do you think the other species truly understand what we did? Or are they just afraid of us now? Chen studied the artwork for a moment before responding. Both probably. Fear and understanding often go hand in hand. But I've seen the reports from the Galactic Child Protection Agency. Applications for membership have increased by 300% since we established it. Species that never cooperated before are now sharing intelligence about potential threats to young beings. The Galactic Child Protection Agency had been humanity's condition for rejoining the galactic community after the war. Every species that wanted trade or diplomatic relations with humans had to sign the Universal Child Protection Accords and submit to regular inspections of their research facilities. Some of the council members still argue that our response was disproportionate, Rebecca observed. Let them argue, Chen replied firmly. Every species in the galaxy now knows that harming human children means facing extinction. More importantly, they know that we consider all young beings worthy of protection. The Accords have been expanded to cover every known sentient species. A group of children ran past them, laughing as they chased a small hovering toy through the gardens. Among them were not just human children, but young beings from a dozen different worlds whose parents had brought them to live in the memorial colony. Look at them, Chen said, softly. 5 years ago, some of those children were considered acceptable research subjects by their own species. Now they're growing up together, learning to see each other as family rather than specimens. Rebecca watched as a young Altarian helped a human child reach a piece of fruit hanging from a tree. The integration program has exceeded all our expectations. Having survivors and refugee children from other species living here has helped our children understand that their suffering wasn't unique, that protecting the innocent is a universal responsibility. Dr. Stone? Timothy appeared beside them again, this time accompanied by a young vegan female who had arrived at the colony 6 months earlier. Yes, Timothy. Zari wants to know if you'll tell her about the rescue operations again. She's having trouble understanding why her people didn't try to save her when she was captured. Rebecca knelt down to address both children. Zari, your people didn't know where you were. The beings who took you were very good at hiding. But once they found out what happened, they immediately asked humanity to help them set up better protection systems for vegan children. The young vegan's compound eyes reflected her confusion. But why did the humans care about saving me? I'm not human. Timothy answered before Rebecca could respond. Because protecting kids is what humans do. It doesn't matter what species they are. If someone hurts children, humans will stop them. Rebecca felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched these two children, survivors of different atrocities, supporting each other with an understanding that transcended species boundaries. That's exactly right, Timothy, she said. Protecting children isn't just about protecting humans, it's about protecting the future of every species. Chen checked her chronometer and sighed. I need to get back to headquarters. The Andromedan delegation wants to discuss expanding the protection protocols to include psychological monitoring for early trauma detection. As the Admiral walked away, Rebecca remained in the garden with the children. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the memorial grounds where the names of 15,000 rescued children were carved into stone. Dr. Stone? Zari asked quietly. Will the bad beings ever come back? Rebecca looked around at the peaceful colony, then up at the sky where she knew human patrol fleets maintained constant watch over the systems where children lived and played. No, Zari, she said with absolute certainty. The bad beings are gone, and if any new ones ever appear, the humans will stop them too. That's a promise every human makes to every child in the galaxy. Timothy nodded solemnly. We learned that there are some things humans will never let anyone do. Hurting kids is the biggest one. As the children returned to their dormitories for the evening, Rebecca remained by the memorial wall. 5 years ago, humanity had faced the unthinkable, their children tortured for alien entertainment. The response had been swift, total, and irreversible. The collective was gone, 40 billion beings eliminated in less than 4 months. Some called it justice, others called it genocide. Rebecca called it a lesson that would echo through galactic history for millennia to come. The galaxy now understood what humanity valued most, and what they would do to protect it. Children across hundreds of worlds slept safely, knowing that if anyone threatened them, humanity would respond with the full fury of a species that had learned there were some lines that could never be crossed. In the end, the collective had achieved their research goal. They had learned exactly what drove humanity, what motivated them beyond all rational calculation. They had discovered that threatening human children didn't just provoke anger or revenge, it awakened something primal and unstoppable that would burn through stars themselves to protect the innocent. The knowledge had cost them everything, but it had saved countless other children across the galaxy from the same fate. And in the gardens of New Earth Memorial Colony, survivors from a dozen worlds played together under the watchful protection of a species that had proven beyond any doubt that some things were worth any sacrifice to defend.